Level of frustration of Nigerians over the worsening power supply problems lately is better imagined and experienced, following, in the particular, the collapse of national grid. It's become a recurrent decimal. We almost hear that weekly these days. Well, the situation has adversely impacted industrial productivity and worsened unemployment as the cost of production now escalates, causing manufacturers to struggle to make profit margin due to the rising cost of the price of diesel in the past few weeks. It will interest you to know that there is an estimated 150 billion naira yearly budget from 2022 to 2027 to support the revenue shortfall of the discos to ensure consumers are not allowed to bear the brunt of inconsistencies in the system. Well, however, with this financial intervention to the power sector, well, the big question is why Nigerians are still suffering from epileptic power supply. Well, let's get to understand the state of Nigeria's power sector and what can really be done to help address this one way or the other. I'm being joined again via Zoom by the head of intelligence and co-founder at Stears, Mr. Michael Famoroti. Thank you so much, Mr. Famoroti. It's good to have you join us on Business Nigeria.
Same here. It's a pleasure. Thanks.
Yes, saying that our power supply is low, kind of one of the lowest in this part of the world, is an understatement. We know what we go through, about 4,500 megawatts for more than 200 million people. First, let's examine this situation. How did we get here with all of the efforts? We've privatized, we've invested a lot. What is happening?
I think in terms of the reason, it actually is pretty simple. The reality with Nigeria's electricity sector is, despite all the regulatory changes, despite all the investment that we've seen over the last 20 years, there's a fundamental problem. And that fundamental problem is that tariffs are not cost reflective for electricity distribution companies. Now, that means that from distribution part of the value chain all the way down to generation, there are severe liquidity challenges that has essentially made it almost impossible for operators to make money and therefore invest in the sector. And as a result, we've seen a gradual deterioration in the capacity of the operators across the value chain. That is probably best seen at the transmission level, which is still the one nationalized part of the value chain, right? Over this year, I think we've seen about 3 or 4 notable grid collapses, and going all the way back to 2013, I believe the national grid has experienced about 120 system collapses, right? So that just puts in context the decline that we've seen. So in terms of addressing the problem, it really has to start from ensuring that we have cost-reflective tariffs and that there's liquidity across the sector. Obviously, that therefore means higher electricity bills for Nigerians, which is another issue on its own.
Cost-reflective tariff. That argument has been on for some time, where people argue which comes first, the chicken or the egg. When Nigerians will say they want constant power if there's going to be that increase. But let's now go down because I know if we stay on this, the power sector discussion, we could take an hour and we won't wrap up. But let's look at the impact of this electricity problem now on households, businesses, and the economy.
Yeah, it's very significant. So let's just put some of it in context, right? So looking at it for businesses in particular, the World Bank did a survey a few years ago looking at the power situation across the world. And unsurprisingly, Nigerian businesses face the highest number of power blackouts in the world, right? So the last estimate is about 380 hours of blackout a month. And the next highest country is, I believe, Congo, where we're looking at about 250 hours, right? So Nigerian businesses are going through it. That already means that they rely on generators quite significantly. Just looking at it on a macro level, all the costs that are associated with the energy crisis amount to 10 trillion naira each year. That is equivalent to 2% of national GDP and more than what the federal government earned in revenues last year, right? So that just puts the cost in perspective for all of us.
Brilliant stuff there. 10 trillion. That's scary to me. But Mr. Famoroti, would you also agree that the grid, the national grid, cannot really satisfy Nigerians? That's talking about power supply. Are you one of those that would agree to that?
Yes, and I do think that implicitly our energy regulators have gotten to the same point, right? So you look at Nigeria's rural electrification plan, and it is heavily off grid. And remember, in terms of rural electrification, only about 20% of Nigerians in those areas are connected to the grid. But there's an understanding that for us to bridge that gap, we need to explore off-grid solutions as much as on-grid, right? For reasons related to cost, speed, and quite frankly, politics as well. There's a lot of issues related to the grid. Like I said, the one part of the value chain that remains in government and is the transmission network. And that is also the most vulnerable part, right? And there are reasons why it's been politically difficult to move that to private ownership, right? So the reality for Nigeria is on a journey to 100% power, off-grid solutions like solar that are more cost-effective, that are modular, they're going to play a very big role in replacing generators, kerosene, and so on in ensuring access to reliable and affordable energy for Nigeria.
As interesting as that looks, many would say that renewables don't really come cheap. Tell us more about renewables and how do you think an average Nigerian can key into this? Because a liter of diesel at the moment is above 800 naira. That is scary.
Yes, indeed. I do think that the cost equation has changed significantly this year. You mentioned diesel prices. Between the end of 2020 and today, diesel prices have at least tripled, right? So that cost dynamic has now changed. You compare it to renewable energy and solar in particular, and between 2009 and now, the total cost of producing solar panels has reduced by about 95%, right? So on one hand, you're seeing the cost of fossil fuels, diesel, and so on go up. On the other hand, solar costs are gradually declining, right? At the same time, the financial issue with solar is the upfront cost of buying or using the equipment. So what we're seeing is a lot of operators and financiers, like Sterling Bank that we partnered with for this report, are coming up with creative ways of addressing that upfront problem. And we're also seeing, for example, a rise in buy now, pay later solutions to help Nigerians spread out the cost of solar, right? So I do think that because of the rising energy costs that we've seen this year, solar now actually is a cost-attractive solution for lots of Nigerians. And it really comes down to finding the model that works for your income level.
Talking about the solar panels, I want to ask you if we are now domesticating production at the moment, because I know at the time there were issues around taxes and levies or tariffs on bringing in some of these renewables that I had someone even on the show to talk about it. If you're trying to promote renewables, then you should make it a little easier to get all of these products and all of that into the country. What is happening along that line?
You're absolutely right. I think that is still the big frustration with the solar industry right now, in that the local industry for sourcing, manufacturing, and assembly has not grown as much as it can. You mentioned the policy of a few years ago, because prior to that policy, solar modules were exempt from VAT, and then there was this confusing law that came in where that exemption was taken away just when the government was trying to promote solar, right? So we still have a lot of work to do on the policy front to ensure that a local um, manufacturing base for solar can thrive. Apart from that, there are issues also around sourcing the right technical talent, right? It's a really complex and technical industry, and right now there's a talent shortage in the sector, right? So all of this essentially means that our industry remains reliant on imports, which are not a problem by themselves, but we have seen the dangers of that, right? Particularly because energy is such a critical part of your economy. We don't want a situation that looks like our petrol and diesel case where any change in foreign exchange is causing serious impact on our ability to keep accessing and using solar products, right? So that is one part that is very much in the infancy stage, and we need to do a lot of work on the policy and financing front to build our local solar industrial base, and we're very far from that right now.
That's not a good one. If we are far from that, so what about educating and enlightening Nigerians on the positives of renewables? How well are we doing with regards to that? Because we need them to accept this. And I also want to ask the two-in-one question. What capacity of solar panels do we have at the moment? Because many think that maybe it's just to maybe power lights, charge our phones, maybe not for big appliances like your air conditioners and all of that. Can you take us through that, Mr. Famoroti?
Yes, so just very quickly on the education front, that continues to be an issue. The reality is that operators have taken the lead there, right? In making sure that they can educate their potential customers. What I would say though is that money talks, and this year, because of the rise in energy prices, that we've seen a lot of people having more willing to learn about how they can leverage solar, right? So I do think that as the economics change, that education problem becomes easier to solve. On the second question on capacity, again, that's actually very important because one of the beautiful things about solar is how modular it is, i.e., you can have a solar calculator, and that's all it does. But at the same time, solar can actually power the entire grid. So what we've seen in Nigeria so far is that there are lots of case studies at different levels showing the viability of solar. Quick examples, there are markets in Abia State, Enugu, and so on that are powered by solar mini grids completely. Even in Lagos, there are certain corporate headquarters that are almost completely solar powered, right? So what we've seen is that anybody can use solar, whether you are somebody who only needs it for a few light bulbs, or you are a large manufacturer who needs 500 kilowatts for, megawatts for a massive plant, right? So that's one of the beauties of solar. It's for everybody because it's very modular and it can power as much or as little as you need it.
Is this, in your thoughts, is this a good time to invest in solar as a business person?
I mean, definitely. The economics speak for themselves. We mentioned diesel prices and the rise in that. I started the conversation by highlighting that tariffs are not cost reflective. We know that long term, that's only going to rise, right? So the reality is that you want to invest in solar as a long-term option because energy prices are only going to keep on going up.
And also back to the regular grid, I'm also worried about the continuous debt from the Gencos to the Discos. They keep owing and a lot of money keeps coming in. How do you think they would account for this? Or would it just remain in this circle?
Yes, so it's very much a political issue. Like I mentioned, the fundamental problem is that tariffs are not cost reflective. So the Discos aren't earning enough to pay the transmission company to pay the generating companies and so on, right? So what we need is higher tariffs. That's the reality. And obviously that is then a very political question. And we're looking to see what happens, post May 2023 in terms of if the next president is, has the willingness and desire to address the situation, right? So I think till then, it's not something that we expect any change.
Any specific agenda, or what do you think, or do you have in mind for anybody who becomes president with regards to the power sector? Specifics now,
yes,
with regards to power.
Specifics, one is address the cost-reflective tariff issue. That's the first one. The second one is, unsurprisingly, again, addressing the city issue, because again, that does impact cost and availability of energy products, right? So I think generally looking at the pricing models that we use in our energy market, right now it's very regulated. Even gas as well is very regulated. So I think liberalizing that needs to be high up on the agenda so that Nigerians can finally get a shot at having reliable energy in the long term.
Well, it's a good way to live it now. I must thank you so much. And we are hopeful, and we think that maybe in a short while, we'll all go solar. We'll go the way of solar and, of course, take advantage of renewables. But they should be affordable, Mr. Famoroti, so that we can all key into it.
Yeah, definitely.